The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the mahogany table as Marcus Blackwood raised his glass of 30-year-old scotch. The exclusive members club on the 42nd floor of the Chrysler Building hummed with the quiet conversations of Manhattan's elite. But tonight, Marcus felt like the king of them all. "To freedom," he declared, his steel-gray eyes meeting Vivian's across the intimate table. The diamonds at her throat caught the light as she smiled, lifting her champagne flute to meet his toast. "To us," Vivian whispered, her voice carrying the slight breathiness that had first captivated him 2 years ago. At 28, she possessed the kind of refined beauty that graced magazine covers, all sharp cheekbones and emerald eyes that seemed to see straight into his soul. Marcus leaned back in the leather chair, savoring the moment. Tomorrow, his lawyers would finalize the divorce papers. Helena would sign away any claim to his tech empire, Blackwood Industries, in exchange for a modest settlement. She'd fought him for months, but her legal team was no match for his resources. The prenup he'd insisted on 7 years ago would ensure she walked away with enough to live comfortably, but nothing that would threaten his billion-dollar empire. "She finally accepted the terms?" Vivian asked, reading his expression with the intuition that had made her such a successful marketing executive before she became his. "This morning," Marcus confirmed, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Her lawyer called mine. She'll take the settlement and disappear. No more drama, no more complications." What he didn't tell Vivian was how relieved he felt. Helena had become increasingly difficult since the children were born, constantly demanding his attention for doctor's appointments and therapy sessions. She'd wanted him to be present, to be involved, to care about things that seemed insignificant compared to building his empire. The children required special attention, expensive treatments, endless patience. It was exhausting, and Marcus had more important things to focus on. Vivian reached across the table, her manicured fingers intertwining with his. "I still can't believe she fought so hard for so long. What did she think would happen?" Marcus shrugged, the gesture dismissive. "Helena always was stubborn. She had this fantasy that I'd change, that I'd suddenly become the devoted family man she wanted. She never understood that some people are meant for greater things." The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd met Helena during his startup days, when he was still hungry and desperate for success. She'd been a pediatric surgeon then, brilliant and compassionate, everything he'd thought he wanted in a partner. But success had changed his perspective. Her medical career seemed small compared to his tech revolution. Her focus on their children seemed narrow-minded when he was reshaping entire industries. "She'll be better off without me," Marcus said, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to convince Vivian or himself. "And the kids will adapt. Children are resilient." Vivian nodded, though something flickered in her eyes. "Have you thought about what happens next? I mean, with us?" Marcus smiled, the expression calculating. "I've thought about nothing else. Once the divorce is final, we'll make it official. I'll introduce you properly to the board, to society. You'll be perfect as the wife of a tech mogul." The word wife made Vivian's cheeks flush with pleasure. She'd waited 2 years for this moment, enduring the secrecy, the hidden meetings, the constant fear of discovery. She'd given up her career, her independence, her own dreams to be available whenever Marcus needed her. But it would all be worth it when she could finally step into the light as Mrs. Marcus Blackwood. Around them, the club's other patrons continued their quiet conversations about mergers, acquisitions, and political maneuvering. Marcus felt a surge of satisfaction, knowing that by tomorrow he'd have everything he'd ever wanted: his empire, his freedom, and a beautiful woman who understood his ambitions. He had no idea that less than 12 hours later, his carefully constructed world would come crashing down around him in the most public way possible. The courthouse steps were slick with morning rain as Marcus emerged from his black sedan, flanked by his legal team. The divorce hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock, and he expected it to be a formality. His lawyers had assured him that Helena's resistance had finally crumbled. Vivian waited in the car, having decided it was better to maintain distance until the proceedings were complete. Marcus straightened his Italian suit and climbed the granite steps, his confidence unwavering. He didn't notice the small crowd gathering at the courthouse entrance until it was too late. Marcus Blackwood. The voice was calm, steady, and achingly familiar. He turned to find Helena standing at the top of the steps, but she wasn't alone. 3 small figures flanked her, their hands clutching the fabric of her simple navy dress. Emma, James, and Sophie, his 6-year-old triplets, whom he hadn't seen in over 8 months. The media had somehow gotten wind of the proceedings. Camera. Flashes erupted around them as Helena stepped forward, her dark hair pulled back severely, her face pale but determined. She looked nothing like the broken woman his lawyers had described. "You thought I'd disappeared," Helena said, her voice carrying clearly across the courthouse plaza. "You thought I'd take your settlement and fade away quietly." Marcus felt his throat constrict. "Helena, not here. Not in front of the children." She laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Not in front of the children. That's rich. Coming from you. When have you ever cared about what happened in front of our children?" The reporters pressed closer, microphones thrust forward. Marcus's lead attorney, Gerald Morrison, stepped protectively beside him, but Helena raised her hand. "No, let them hear this," she said. "Let them hear about the father who walked away when his children needed him most." Emma, the smallest of the triplets, tugged at Helena's dress. Her large brown eyes, so much like Marcus's own, were confused and frightened by the crowd. James, who struggled with autism, began stimming, his hands flapping nervously. Sophie, born with a heart condition that required ongoing treatment, pressed close to her mother's side. "These are your children, Marcus," Helena continued, her voice breaking slightly. "Emma hasn't spoken your name in 4 months because she thinks she did something wrong. James asks why Daddy doesn't come to his therapy appointments anymore. And Sophie," her voice caught, "Sophie drew you a picture for your birthday. It's been sitting on her nightstand for 6 months because she keeps hoping you'll come back to see it." The cameras captured every word, every emotion flickering across Marcus's face. He could see his carefully constructed image crumbling in. Real time. "You don't understand," Marcus started, but Helena cut him off. "I understand perfectly. You wanted a trophy wife and perfect children who would enhance your image. When you got 3 children who required actual love, actual presence, actual sacrifice, you ran." She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "I'm not here to sign your divorce papers, Marcus. I'm here to serve you with—" "Mine!" Gerald Morrison snatched the papers, scanning them quickly. His face went ashen. This is a countersuit for abandonment, emotional distress, and—" He looked up, alarmed. "Financial fraud?" Helena smiled for the first time, and it was terrifying. "Did you really think I'd been sitting quietly all these months, Marcus? I've been building a case, bank records, witness testimonies, documentation of every missed appointment, every broken promise, every time you chose your empire over your family." Marcus felt the world tilting beneath his feet. "Helena, we can discuss this privately. Let's not air our personal matters." "Personal matters?" Helena's voice rose. "You made this public the moment you decided to parade your mistress around, while your children wondered where their father went. You want privacy now? Where was that consideration when Sophie was in the hospital and you were in Monaco with your girlfriend?" The crowd of reporters had grown, and Marcus could see camera, crew setting up. This wasn't just news. This was a scandal that would dominate headlines for weeks. One of the reporters called out, "Mrs. Blackwood, what do you hope to achieve with this lawsuit?" Helena turned to face the cameras directly, her children still, pressed close to her sides. "I want the world to know what kind of man Marcus Blackwood really is. Not the philanthropist persona he's crafted, not the innovative CEO the magazines write about. I want them to see the man who told his 6-year-old daughter that her heart surgery wasn't as important as his board meeting. Marcus's world went silent except for the thunderous beating of his own heart. Every flash, every question, every shocked murmur from the crowd seemed to echo from a great distance. In his car, Vivian watched the scene unfold through the tinted windows, her hand pressed to her mouth in horror. This wasn't the woman Marcus had described. Cold, calculating, vindictive. This was a mother protecting her children, and Vivian realized with sickening clarity that everything Marcus had told her about his marriage had been a lie. Part 3. The crumbling foundation. Vivian's hands trembled as she locked the hotel room door behind her. The images from the courthouse steps played on every news channel, and her phone buzzed incessantly with calls from reporters who had somehow obtained her number. She'd fled the scene before Marcus could return to the car, unable to face him after witnessing Helena's devastating revelations. The woman on television bore no resemblance to the manipulative, cold wife Marcus had described. Helena Blackwood was articulate, composed, and clearly devoted to her children. As Vivian watched the replay of the press conference, she felt the careful narrative Marcus had constructed crumbling around her. Mrs. Blackwood, can you elaborate on the abandonment charges? A reporter had asked. Helena's response had been precise and heartbreaking. My husband hasn't seen his children in 8 months. He missed Emma's first successful speech therapy breakthrough, James's autism assessment, and Sophie's cardiac follow-up. When I called to tell him Sophie had been rushed to the emergency room with chest pains, he told his assistant to handle it because he was in a merger meeting. Vivian switched off the television and buried her face in her hands. How had she been so blind? She thought back to all the times Marcus had canceled plans with her, claiming Helena was being difficult about the children. Now she understood that Helena had likely been desperately trying to involve him in his own family's life. Her phone rang. Marcus's name flashed on the screen, but she couldn't bring herself to answer. Not yet. Not until she processed what she'd witnessed. Meanwhile, across town in her modest Upper West Side apartment, Helena sat at her kitchen table with Rebecca Torres, the tenacious family attorney who had agreed to take her case pro bono after hearing the details of Marcus's abandonment. The media response is overwhelming, Rebecca said, scrolling through social media on her tablet. Public opinion is firmly on your side. Our Blackwood children is trending, and the support for you and the kids is incredible. Helena barely glanced at the screen. She was more focused on Emma, who sat nearby working on a puzzle, her concentration intense. The little girl had struggled with developmental delays that required extensive therapy, but she'd made remarkable progress in recent months, progress Marcus knew nothing about because he'd never bothered to attend a single session. What happens now? Helena asked, her voice tired but determined. Rebecca leaned forward, her expression serious. Now we go for everything. The forensic accountants I hired found irregularities in Blackwood Industries' books. It appears Marcus has been using company funds for personal expenses, including that Monaco trip with Vivian. We're talking about potential tax evasion, shareholder fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. Helena felt a flicker of satisfaction. He always said business was more important than family. Let's see how important it is when it all falls apart. There's something else, Rebecca continued. I've been investigating Vivian Chen. She's not the calculating homewrecker the media is painting her as. From what I can gather, she was genuinely misled about your situation. Marcus told her you were separated, that you'd been fighting over money, that you were keeping the children from him out of spite. Helena considered this. She'd felt nothing but anger toward the woman who had been sharing her husband's bed. But now she wondered if Vivian was as much a victim of Marcus's manipulation as she was. Back in her hotel room, Vivian finally answered. Her phone when it rang for the 10th time. Where are you? Marcus's voice was strained, desperate. I've been looking everywhere. I'm at the Meridian, she said quietly. Thank God. Stay there. I'm coming over. We need to talk about damage control. Marcus. Vivian's voice was barely a whisper. Is it true? What she said about the children? About you missing their medical appointments? A pause. Vivian, you don't understand the pressure I'm under. Helena has always been manipulative. Stop. The word came out sharper than she intended. Just stop lying to me. I saw those children, Marcus. I saw their faces. They don't know you, do they? You're a stranger to your own kids. That's not... It's complicated. Helena made it difficult for me to see them. No, Vivian said, her voice growing stronger. You made it difficult. You chose not to see them because they weren't convenient for your image, just like you chose me because I was convenient for your ego. The boardroom at Blackwood Industries had never felt smaller. Marcus sat at the head of the polished conference table, his usually commanding presence diminished by the weight of the crisis surrounding him. The emergency board meeting had been called after 3 days of devastating media coverage, and the faces staring back at him ranged from concerned to openly hostile. The stock has dropped 30%, announced board member Patricia Hartwell, her voice clipped and professional. Our major investors are pulling out and 2 government contracts are under review pending the outcome of your legal troubles. Marcus loosened his tie, feeling the walls closing in. This is a personal matter that's been blown out of proportion by the media. It has nothing to do with the company's operations. Nothing to do with the company? The voice belonged to Detective Raymond Cross, who had just entered the boardroom with 2 federal agents and a briefcase full of documents. I'm afraid that's not accurate, Mr. Blackwood. The board members exchanged alarmed glances as Detective Cross approached the table. He was a weathered man in his 50s, with keen eyes that had seen too many white-collar criminals think they were untouchable. We have a warrant to examine Blackwood Industries' financial records, Cross continued, placing the documents on the table. There are allegations of misappropriation of funds, tax evasion, and securities fraud. Marcus's lawyer, Gerald Morrison, stood quickly. This is highly irregular. We should discuss this privately. Actually, we should discuss this very publicly, Cross replied. Especially the part where Mr. Blackwood used company jets for personal vacations, charged his mistress's expenses to the corporate account, and hid assets offshore to avoid paying child support. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Board member Richard Chen, no relation to Vivian, slammed his folder shut. Marcus, please tell me this isn't true. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but Cross continued his devastating litany. $200,000 in charges at a Monaco casino, charged to client entertainment. A $50,000 necklace purchased in Paris, listed as marketing materials. Private therapy sessions for Vivian Chen, billed as consulting. Fees. Patricia Hartwell's face had gone white. You used shareholder money to fund your affair? It's not that simple, Marcus began, but his words sounded hollow even to himself. Detective Cross opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of photographs. These are your children's medical bills, Mr. Blackwood. Unpaid bills for Emma's speech. Therapy, James's autism treatments, and Sophie's cardiac care. Bills that your ex-wife has been struggling to pay while you spent more on a single weekend getaway than she receives in monthly support. The boardroom fell silent except for the sound of papers rustling as Cross continued to present evidence. Marcus felt his empire crumbling in real time, each revelation stripping away another layer of his carefully constructed facade. Meanwhile, across town in family court, Helena sat beside Rebecca Torres as Judge Patricia Morrison reviewed their custody filing. The courtroom was packed with reporters, but Helena's attention was focused entirely on the woman behind the bench who would help determine her children's future. Mrs. Blackwood, Judge Morrison said, your petition for sole custody is quite comprehensive. Can you explain to the court why you believe supervised visitation is appropriate? Helena stood, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. Your Honor, Marcus Blackwood has had no meaningful contact with his children in 8 months. He has missed every medical appointment, every school conference, every milestone. When our daughter Sophie was hospitalized with a cardiac episode, he sent his assistant instead of coming himself. She gestured to a thick folder Rebecca held. We have documented evidence of his complete absence from their lives, as well as his failure to provide adequate financial support despite having the means to do so. Judge Morrison nodded grimly. And the children's medical needs? Emma requires ongoing speech therapy for developmental delays. James is on the autism spectrum and needs consistent behavioral therapy. Sophie has a congenital heart condition requiring regular monitoring. Helena's voice caught slightly. These aren't inconveniences, Your Honor. They're my children's daily realities, and their father chose to walk away rather than face them. The judge made notes as Helena spoke, occasionally glancing at the media section where cameras captured every word. This case would set precedents, and Judge Morrison was acutely aware of the implications. Mrs. Blackwood, what do you hope to achieve through these proceedings? Helena stood straighter, drawing strength from the knowledge that her children were safe with her neighbor, away from the circus surrounding the courthouse. I want legal protection for my children, Your Honor. I want Marcus to be held accountable for his abandonment, and I want to ensure that if he ever tries to re-enter their lives, it's on terms that prioritize their well-being over his convenience. Back at Blackwood Industries, the board meeting had devolved into chaos. Emergency votes were being called, resignation demands were flying, and Marcus could see his life's work dissolving before his eyes. I move that Marcus Blackwood be removed as CEO effective immediately, Patricia Hartwell announced. Seconded, came Richard Chen's voice. As the vote was tallied, 8 in favor, 1 abstention, Marcus's own vote meaningless, Detective Cross approached with handcuffs. Marcus Blackwood, you're under arrest for tax evasion, securities fraud, and misappropriation of corporate funds. The cameras outside captured every moment as Marcus was led from his own building in handcuffs, his fall from grace complete and devastatingly public. In family court, Judge Morrison delivered her ruling with the weight of Solomon. Sole custody is awarded to Helena Blackwood. Supervised visitation may be considered for the father pending completion of court-mandated counseling and financial obligations being met. Helena felt her knees nearly buckle with relief. For the first time in years, her children's future was secure. Part 5. The True Victory. 6 months later, Helena stood in the kitchen of her new home, sunlight streaming through windows that actually opened, a simple pleasure she'd forgotten during her years in Marcus's sterile penthouse. The house in Westchester was modest by billionaire standards, but it felt more like home than anywhere she'd lived in years. Emma sat at the breakfast table, chattering excitedly about her upcoming school play. Her speech had improved dramatically, with consistent therapy, and she'd made friends with children who didn't know or care who her father was. James was in the living room, carefully arranging his toy cars in perfect lines, a behavior his therapist had helped Helena understand and embrace rather than correct. Sophie colored at the kitchen island, her latest cardiac checkup having shown remarkable improvement. Dr. Park is coming to dinner tonight, Helena announced, smiling at the chorus of cheers that erupted from her children. Dr. Samuel Park had become part of their lives gradually, naturally. He was the developmental pediatrician who'd been treating James, a kind man who understood that loving a child meant accepting all of them, including the parts that required extra patience and care. What had started as professional consultations had evolved into coffee dates, then family dinners, and finally into something Helena had never expected to find again. Genuine love. Samuel arrived at 6, carrying flowers for Helena and small gifts for each child, a sensory toy for James, a book about brave princesses for Emma, and art supplies for So,